I've spent my life working with music, and it's still mysterious to me in some ways. And I would say probably most musicians would say that, and that's part of the magical attraction of it for us, you know. We're like sort of moths to this flame of mystery.
Thank you so much for coming back to Sydney Opera House. You're one of my favourite guests we've had here. Sleep was an extraordinary moment. We were so proud to host your debut in 2014. This is just brilliant and a big deal for me. So thank you for coming and for having a chat.
Great to be here. Great to be back.
I've been following your work for many years, and this concept of a conversation rather than a lecture comes up regularly. And I think the phrase you used in relation to ambient orchestra and Barbican was you're interested in where your work intersects with the biography of the listener.
Right.
And I'd love to hear what you think of this concept.
Yeah, I mean, I think creativity really is a social project. It's a project which connects other minds, you know, minds to one another. It's a way to experience how someone else sees the world, how they live their life, to encounter that in a very direct way, because I think music is a very direct medium. You know, it seems to sort of bypass a lot of our censoring mind, and it can be a very rich experience because of that. You know, the listeners, as you say, you know, they bring their biography to the piece, and you get this very rich, sort of unique meeting point. And that's really one of the nicest things about live music, because actually that's a unique thing in that moment and only once. So yeah, I think it feels like creative work music is really something which is fundamentally collaborative.
There's something inherently generous in this idea of looking to have a conversation rather than a lecture. Was there music you sort of respected but felt it wasn't having a conversation with its audience that led you to want to have a wider, more open approach?
Well, I think, you know, I mean, when I was a student, there was an orthodoxy within classical music, and that was the modernist kind of canon, sort of post-Boulez, where the music was really the working out of an intellectual construct, more like being at a lecture. And really, there was this sort of feeling that the music was sort of cleverer than you. And obviously, that's very alienating, you know. I really felt that wasn't what I wanted to do. You know, I wanted to have kind of a static position, a language which was comprehensible. Because for me, creativity is about communication. You know, if you want to communicate, you want to try and be intelligible in some way. So I kind of stripped away all of that complexity. And I was sort of looking for a language which was, in a way, quite plain spoken, quite sort of straightforward, minimal, really.
That approach can have a profound emotional effect as well, or instead of a purely intellectual one. I love this idea of music bypassing things. I've always thought of music as one of the most powerful art forms. I love literature, I love, you know, visual art, but music always reminds me of scent. It goes in and you can't help but be somewhere. What is it for you about music that does this profound, vast effect?
Well, it is like scent. I mean, it's interesting with music because, you know, I've spent my life working with music, and it's still mysterious to me in some ways. And I would say probably most musicians would say that, and that's part of the magical attraction of it for us, you know. We're like sort of moths to this flame of mystery. You know, we work with it all the time. And of course, you know, when you're working on a piece, you have ideas and sort of planning and stratagem and theory and things you want to express, and you work with structure and time and density and all these different things. So it's conceptual, but it's also fundamentally a feeling, instinctive thing. And I love that interplay that it has, you know, between the sort of ideas-y part of us and the purely sensory part of it. And it's incredibly direct emotional impact. And it's, for me, it's a magical thing. I never tire of it.
It gives it its power.
Yeah.
I think you might know that Brian Eno was the founding curator of this festival. Two things you've touched on there go straight to another aspect of Eno's writings that have really affected me. He gives two reasons why art's important that I think could be more widely spread. One is art is one of the primary ways we rehearse seeing the world through another's eyes, in a safe way, not in the middle of a bridge, but through a poem or a song. And the other is that art is one of the ways we go to have a safe place to sit with mystery, because things will happen in our lives, like the death of a loved one or a breakdown of a relationship, that have no neat cognitive outcome. How do you feel art has a useful role to play in the wider world?
Well, I agree with both of those thoughts. I think creativity can also be a place to reflect on specific themes and ideas. Again, going back a little bit to Brian's idea of sort of rehearsing specific things within a creative framework. I mean, it makes me think about Voices, a piece from 2019. So this was during the sort of dark days of the Trump years, and Yulia and I were, like a lot of people, feeling a bit hopeless and wondered what could we do. So we started thinking about the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and that seemed to me something I could get behind, and something that kind of made me feel better when I read it, right? Because that text is all about human potential and overcoming the sort of current moment in the search for something better and the expectation actually of something better. So I made this piece, Voices. So Voices is essentially it's like a place to think about the Universal Declaration. So I think those sorts of things can be really useful, and obviously, within cinema or literature or visual art, you can also have these sorts of things where you have a representation of a situation and a kind of suggestion about how to encounter it.
Voices was a profoundly affecting work. I first discovered it in the pandemic, and it was an absolute refuge and a beautiful refraction of the concept of a document I'd probably seen as a little dry, but the way the voices that you gave to it and the surrounding support of the music was genuinely affecting. It's beautiful.
Oh, thank you.
I'm really interested, the ambient works you've brought for ambient orchestra. Eno's original idea of ambient music, that it was sort of to prioritize sort of tone and atmosphere over structure and rhythm. But you have a great interest in structure and are able to do a lot of deep thinking on structure without it being a complicated equation to solve. A lot of work has to go into something that may look deceptively simple. I'd love to hear how you feel this ambient work that isn't just sort of taking a 70s electronic idea and feeding it back through an orchestra is relating to sort of Eric Satie, furniture music, structure, tone, rhythm. I'd love to hear your thoughts on ambient music in this setting.
Yeah, well, I've had a long-term fascination with ambient music. One of the things that sort of made me interested in the potential of music and the idea of being a composer was encountering, those early ambient records as a teenager. So it's been around for a long time for me. We associate it with electronics, and one of the things I wanted to do is sort of draw works into one program from really across my output over many years, which had the potential to be rendered purely instrumentally, but could sort of speak to that idea of the sort of sensory aspect of sound, which is very much in the foreground in ambient music, the sort of haptic, tactile aspect of sound. So that was the sort of starting point. And then we thought about making a concert program which would have sort of different facets of this language. So it's, it's like sort of walking around a sculpture a little bit or something, just to kind of look at this from different perspectives through different pieces.
It's beautiful, that idea of walking around a sculpture. I felt that in the Sleep experience, where you were essentially in a landscape.
Right.
You weren't waiting for that, bit that you knew. You were in an 8-hour experience. It was quite profound. But I was reading when you were talking about the Barbican performance of this idea of this concert providing a place for tranquility and reflection. But also many of the works you've chosen come from Memory House and have this idea of looking for meaning and purpose as well. And I'd love to hear more on this concept of tranquility, reflection, but the restlessness of looking for meaning and purpose at the same time.
Yeah, that's in a way, an interesting contradiction, isn't it? I suppose, sleep, taking that as an example, it's a big space to rest. It's a big space to dream into. And it's also an invitation to kind of switch off and stop. And one of the things that happened over the years we've played Sleep, a lot of people have written to us or commented about their experiences. And one of the very common things is that people really reflect on the big questions of their lives while listening to this music, while inhabiting this space. And I think that's to do with the fact that, we don't often give ourselves a time to just stop. And when we do stop, all the stuff we've been trying not to think about actually just sort of bubbles up. The actually the real questions, the fundamental questions. You know, why am I doing what I'm doing? Why am I here? You know, all of this stuff. And I think in a way that sort of leads naturally to these sorts of questions that this music is all about. You know, the kind of the big stuff, the big human questions. And this is like a musical space to sort of reflect on those things.
Are you conscious of those big questions as you're composing and writing, or is it something you step back and see as sort of as an invisible architecture that was underpinning it the whole time?
Well, I mean, those questions are what make me want to write things in the first place. So, you know, a piece like Voices or Sleep, I mean, they seem to me to be important things. You know, and it's the things that seem to me to be important that kind of make me want to write a piece. Yeah.
They are the parts of your work that affect me enormously, and it's a huge privilege to have you here, Max. Thank you so much for coming once again, and we'll have you back as soon as possible.
It's great to be here.
Thank you.
Thanks.